Nube Negra is the third full-length album from Demoniac, and not the New Zealand one. This is the Chilean one, and this is a black thrash metal band with some, I would say, progressive thrash metal tendencies. And I only say that because they shred a lot, and they're quite accomplished in their technique, and there are some avant-garde and kind of noir jazz elements fused in here, thanks to some pronounced clarinet work that comes in the second half of the album. Otherwise, this is a very lightly blackened thrash metal style, which is mostly squarely in the realm of more modern takes out of Chile on the traditional thrash metal aggression of the late 80s. I would say a lot of what this band does kind of came from what bands like Ripper brought to thrash metal back in the sort of late 2000s, early 2010s, and this band kind of came along with that wave and had a lot of that sort of creator-esque influence on their first record, although they sort of had their own touch and their own technique behind their work on Intemperance, their first album, but that certainly evolved quite a bit by the time their second record came out in 2020. So It Goes was one of the best records of 2020 and number 23 on my top 100 of that year. Huge fan of the band, huge fan of Chilean thrash, and something I've followed avidly for many, many years. So this was a standout band, a unique band who were both sophisticated and raw. It's sort of a nice mix between progressive thrash metal's more intense early beginnings with like the first Sadist record, but also a touch of the finesse of early Mekong Delta, or however else you'd sort of slot in what was unique about their sound back then. So a lot of that, actually all of that charm is still here on the third album, and we'll cut into a track here which makes that very clear the moment you hit it. So much like a lot of the like Chilean thrash bands are sort of iterating on popular albums in the last several years, we find that Demoniac have cut back on the sort of wall of riffs approach a little bit for the sake of incorporating more of what makes them unique, and that's a natural thing to do, but certainly one that doesn't feel quite as technical and sort of, I guess, busy as their last record did at some points. On the other hand, we get a more expressive, kind of shred-filled record that just never stops wailing on the solos throughout. And it's not quite neoclassical shred. They do kind of dirty it up for the sake of it remaining interesting and not prescribed. But the speed of the attack is always great, and the vocalist changes it up throughout as the sort of, I guess I would say, meandering in and out of view style of riffing is both tied to progressive thrash metal and its more inventive rhythmic gimmickry, as well as just their own unique take on it, which does sometimes veers into different atmospheric realms, I guess I would say. Now, we've had records in the last few years from Trastorned earlier this year and Hellish later last year, which sort of did a similar thing. They sort of amplified their technique and their touch while also keeping it blackened and aggressive. And in this sense, we do get this distinct feeling of South American thrash metal, which is something you'd know if you really followed that style, particularly the late 80s and some of the revival stuff. But on this record, they do again lean into their signature, or their, what's interesting about them, which is experimentation, and they go a little overboard on one of the songs here in term and synthese decor, where they use like a drowning synthesizer and an accordion to sort of have this moment before the Granada hits. Granada is kind of the big single you just heard, and of course that song is a big event. It would be easy to overlook a song like La Caída when Granada is obviously kind of the nuke on the record. It's a thing just like on the last record, where that's going to be the piece you remember. It's what pulls you back to this record but there are some pretty solid pieces on here overall. It feels quite consistent compared to So It Goes. It feels like they thought about the arrangement of the tracks. They thought about how everything plays out, and they made sure the second half was maybe a little bit more reinforced with substantial pieces, longer pieces that reinforce the actual style of the band and not just the extraneous things, the accoutrement that make them extra interesting. So, yeah, they're shredding through this whole thing. They've got riffs until the very end, and the last three songs are probably the strongest on the album outside of a couple of others. So this feels like a much more complete record than the last one. It feels like a little bit more considered and mature than the last one, and in a lot of ways, that just makes it a better listening experience with a lot of the same traits and interest. I think that it is a grand sequel. It is not too far of a step outside of themselves. It's not too progressive. It's not, it shreds quite a bit and all that, and they certainly don't emphasize the keyboards enough here, even though they are interesting in their addition under the layers there. The bass guitar sound could be a little bit more perfected, in my opinion, but overall, this is an ambitious step forward for the band, and just a great thrash metal record for the modern day here. This is a strong standard for now, and a very high recommendation for me. So go ahead and read the review for more information if you want it, and check out the album. It releases tomorrow.
Ganando por millones de veces y no pasará. Recuerdo olvidado de los puertos.